Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I'm your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, came across this article. It's interesting, and it's one of those things. It's a subject that sort of really got on my nerves. So let's get right into it. And this is coming to us from the good folks over at CBR.com. One Blake Hawkins again. And it is the Rings of Power can tackle Celeborn's death by copying a Lord of the Rings move. Celeborn was noticeably missing from the Rings of Power because he was dead. But there's still a way that he could appear on the Lord of the Rings prequel. All right. When Amazon announced the Rings of Power, fans quickly found out that a warlike version of Galadriel would be leading the ensemble group of characters. That was an issue for some of the Lord of the Rings fans because they believed that Galadriel wouldn't work as a warlike figure. Of course, that was a ridiculous complaint because Galadriel was more powerful than Star Wars Yoda. Yes, that is an actual quote. So, Morfydd Clark stepped into the role and commanded the screen, even if some of her dialogue was a bit clunky, you think? Or over the top, you think? However, there was something peculiar about her character. I don't know why I'm having issues with the English today. All right, in Lord of the Rings, Galadriel was still married to Celeborn during the Second Age. But Celeborn was nowhere to be found on the Rings of Power. Galadriel actually said that he was dead. And the thing is, he might be dead. The series might be imitating one of Lord of the Rings' most notorious moves by having him take Glorfindel's place, just like Arwen. How fans know that Celeborn was dead on the Rings of Power. Going into the Rings of Power, Celeborn was missing from the character announcements and posters. Then, he didn't appear at all in the first 6 episodes, so fans began to wonder if Galadriel meeting and marrying him would be a plot point. But that changed in episode 7, The Eye. In a moment of rare openness, Galadriel told Theo that her husband had been brutally killed in the War of Wrath. Right away, fans started to wonder how that made any sense. Most fans assumed that Galadriel was simply wrong. Celeborn had to be alive because Celeborn can't not be a part of the story. He and Galadriel had a daughter named Celebrian, and she ends up marrying Elrond. So it's pretty crucial that he shows up at some point. Yet Galadriel was an elf and had a pretty good idea of what was happening. Not to mention, she wandered Middle-earth for over 400 years after the War of Wrath. So, if Celeborn was actually alive, she probably would have found him or found some kind of information about him. While that seems like quite the problem, there is a way that Celeborn could be dead and appear on the series. That could happen if the Rings of Power gives Celeborn a storyline similar to a powerful elf named Glorfindel. If that happens, it won't be the first time that Glorfindel was snubbed. Like Arwen, Celeborn could be getting Glorfindel's storyline. Glorfindel was lord of the House of the Golden Flower during the First Age of Middle-earth. He lived in Gondolin with High King Turgon, until the city fell to Morgoth. During the fall of Gondolin, Glorfindel helped Eärendil, Idril, and Tuor escape the city. While doing so, he killed a Balrog, but he gave up his life to do so. Then, over 1,000 years later, Glorfindel was resurrected and sent back to Middle-earth with power close to a Maiaric level. Is that a word? Maiaric level? I know some of you guys have been correcting me because, again, my inner Bronx person wants to always put R whenever I say Maya. I don't say it as Maya. I tend to say Maiar or Maiar. But is Maiaric a word? I don't know. Close to a Maiaric level. While it might be a long shot, the Rings of Power may take that storyline and superimpose it on Celeborn's character, meaning he could have died at some point during the War of Wrath, and then he could be sent back to Middle-earth to be with Galadriel. That way, Galadriel would be correct that her husband died, and Celeborn could still fill his crucial role. Besides, an emotional reunion between the two would add some depth to Galadriel's normally stoic character. It's worth noting that fans probably wouldn't like Celeborn commandeering Glorfindel's storyline because Glorfindel was one of Lord of the Rings' strongest elves. A portion of the Lord of the Ring fan base has been vocal about its dislike for the series as a whole, and continuing to break canon probably won't be taken well. However, replacing Glorfindel wouldn't be without precedent. Peter Jackson's movies send Arwen to rescue Frodo from the Nazgul rather than Glorfindel, which robbed the elf of his only movie appearance. So, having Celeborn take over Glorfindel's story would only be following in Lord of the Rings' footsteps, even if he doesn't officially take over Glorfindel's arc. Finding a way for Celeborn to be resurrected seems paramount for season 2. Yeah, because this is something that's really bothered me because that is one of the lore breaks that the Rings of Pewter did that really has some serious consequence. Like it can fuck up a lot of things, right? And you guys know this, but for those who may not be aware, okay, Galadriel's married to Celeborn, and they are the ones that you see in Lothlorien when Frodo and crew show up in Lothlorien, right? In Lord of the Rings, okay? I'll just go back to it. Like that's him, right? And you see him. It basically in two sequences in the Lord of the Rings movies. He shows he's there with Galadriel when Frodo and the Fellowship show up in Lothlorien. He's also there at the end with Galadriel when they're boarding the last ship with Gandalf and Bilbo and Frodo leaving and going into the West. So he's there throughout the Second Age, and him and Galadriel have a daughter named Celebrian. Okay. And Celebrian's crucial because, as the article points out, Celebrian ends up marrying Elrond. Okay. Now you're like, okay, so Elrond. We don't even see his wife in the movies and stuff like that, and his wife really doesn't play any major role in the books or anything like that. Yes, but him and his wife have a daughter. Well, they have a couple of kids, but one of them being a daughter, and that daughter is Arwen, who, as you know, marries Aragorn, played by Liv Tyler in the films. So, without Celebrian, or I should say without Celeborn, there is no Celebrian. Without Celebrian, there is no Arwen. Without Arwen, there's nobody for Aragorn to marry. So you see how the Rings of Pewter claiming he's dead thoroughly fucks the lore. I mean, it thoroughly blows it up. So they're going to have to bring him in to the show. Now, the question is, how do they do that? Now, I think they're going to do something similar to what this article just laid out. They're going to go the Glorfindel route and say that, yes, he was killed, but he was sent back. He did his time in the halls of Mandos, and then he was sent back. And, he would have sent word, but, he needed to charge his cell phone or something. I don't know, but they're definitely gonna bring him back somehow. They could do it one of two ways: either that way with the whole he's dead and halls of Mandos gets sent back, or they could do it the more what I would consider, and I'm assuming a lot of Tolkien fans would consider this the sort of in keeping in line with the Rings of Pewter and its crappy writing and crappy storytelling. They're going to say, well, he wasn't really dead. He wasn't really dead. He was a prisoner of Sauron's. He was locked away, wherever Adar and these orcs were. That's, he was hidden away and stuff like that as a prisoner. They kept moving him around or something like that. And then eventually, because Galadriel is still going to be on her genocidal maniac, rampage across the countryside, she'll come across him and find him, and then you'll find that, oh, no, he's actually alive. But he's going to be weak. I guarantee you the show is going to portray him as weak and nothing like how he is in the books. He is not going to be, quote-unquote, Galadriel's equal in any way. He is going to be, demasculinate, you know what I mean. He's gonna be pussified, basically. Um, to not to put too fine of a point on it. They're gonna demasculate him. You know, they're going to um, take away any sort of agency that he may have had, right? Because you can't have him competing in any way in terms of being an authoritative figure with Galadriel. Okay, you've established her as the authoritative figure amongst the elves, amongst the main ensemble cast, right? So you can't have her husband suddenly, however he comes back, um, displace her from that role. They won't do that. I guarantee you, they won't do that. So we're going to get some version of Celeborn. I think more likely the shitty story route, i.e., he was never really dead. She just, couldn't find him for half a century. I mean, for a couple of centuries, like 4 centuries. And then when we do find him, he's going to be a shell of what Celeborn should be, right? So that's just my take on it. But again, they will bring him back because I think even they realize by having him dead, and if you keep him dead, you completely screw the pooch in terms of there's no Celebrian, there's no wife of Elrond, there's no mother of Arwen, hence no Arwen. And they know they can't do that, right? Because that would directly violate. They've said that part of getting the rights was that they couldn't do anything that directly contradicted what was already written, right? Now, they could play fast and loose with things that don't really go into a lot of detail, but they couldn't write anything that directly contradicts what Tolkien wrote. Okay, that was part of the licensing agreement. So, for instance, they couldn't say, have, I don't know, suddenly all the Ents and Entwives, are having an Entmoot, in Rune, right? They couldn't do that because it directly contradicts things that Tolkien has in his books, right? They couldn't just have Legolas show up in the Second Age, like right now where the show's at right now, before the fall of Numenor, right? And sort of just show up and being a friend of Isildur, right? They can't do that because that directly contradicts what Tolkien wrote. So what they're going to do is they're going to sort of half-ass it. They're going to say, well, you know, he was never really dead. He was sort of just a prisoner that was moved around with other prisoners until there was a central location, i.e., Mordor, for the orcs and Sauron's people to bring him. Maybe it's the with the mystics in Rune, right? The Nazgûls. Maybe their people are the ones that have some of these prisoners that of Sauron's, right? And anyway, we'll find out that he's not dead. But he'll be a fraction of what he once was. He will be a shell of the Celeborn we as Tolkien fans would come to expect from having read the books and so on and so forth. And even if they go the other way, where he did die and he spends time in the halls of Mandos and then comes back, again, I think he's still going to be subordinate to Galadriel, because they're not going to take away her agency and her authoritative role within the story. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting take, because it's one of those things that really, really bothered me when I saw they had her say that essentially he was dead. But yeah, that's all I got on this one. It'll be interesting to see how they play that one out. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you think we're getting a I was dead, sent to the halls of Mandos, and then brought back Celeborn? Or do you think we're going to get the cheesy, oh, yeah, well, the orcs, for the past half a millennium, have been moving around Sauron's prisoners until they could figure out a place to set up shop. Okay, and now that they have a place to set up shop, Mordor, that's where we're all headed. And at some point, they get intercepted, and Celeborn gets rescued. But he's all sorts of jacked up, and he's like, reduced to just being, somebody who is a bitch. Basically, I don't know how else to say it. I was trying to avoid saying it that way, but there's no other way to say it. Yeah, let me know which one you think they're going to do. I think they're doing that one. I think they're doing the finding him as a prisoner. He was never really dead, but now he's not Celeborn in any sort of and in any way that resembles what we as Tolkien fans would have expected Celeborn to be. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you like the video, like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means do so. It gets us seen, helps us with the algorithm. If you have not subscribed yet, I would hope that you would consider subscribing and joining the army of beautiful badasses. And if you have subscribed, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And as always, you are freaking awesome. And remember, I will see you on the next one. Until then, be good, be safe, be awesome, and stay more dorkish. Peace.